Hey guys, Cookies here. This is the first part of our Bigwig setup series for the new raid, Aberrus, the Shadowed Crucible. And this is going to be mostly how do we look at and utilize multiple resources that will allow us to both learn the bosses and set up our add-ons and profiles and stuff like that in a way that help us without many other resources out there that will kind of do it for us. So there's going to be a few things that we're going to need here. The first thing is going to be Bigwigs, the add-on. The next thing is we're going to want to have Mythic Trap open. It's mythictrap.com. And then I also like to use warcraftlogs.com. And we're going to kind of combine these different things together to get the information we need when stepping into a raid that we aren't really familiar with, or there's not a lot of guides out for, or a lot of resources and things like that. So how we're going to start is we're going to open our Bigwig settings by just typing /BW in game. Then we'll go to raid bosses. Then we're going to find Aberrus, the Shadowed Crucible. And then we'll just start with the first boss, Kazzara, the Hellforged. And we're going to set these up for Mythic, but even if you're just a Heroic Raider or a Normal Raider or you just do LFR, this will still be all applicable because if you set it up for Mythic, it's going to still be relevant for, the other difficulties and whatnot. So we have our Bigwigs open. The next thing we need to do is understand what the boss does. So I'm going into this completely blind. I've seen maybe the first like 2 or 3 bosses, the general idea of how they work, but I have not looked at guides or very many resources. I've seen basically like a fight bot or two since the Race to World First has been happening. So on Mythic Trap, we're going to go to Aberrus up here at the top and then just select the first boss. And then we're going to set up at the top here with the correct filters. So we're going to want to use the Mythic Raid difficulty, and then we can set it up as a healer to give us additional filters that, we may not need to worry about. But if you're not a healer, then maybe leave this off. But otherwise, it really shouldn't affect it too much. You're still going to see all the very important things no matter what you pick. All right, and then next up, this gives us a quick fight overview, which we can read if that helps us, but I'm just going to scroll down here and just give you guys a walkthrough of basically what I do when I'm trying to look for what I need to set up on my Bigwigs. So then the next thing before we start actually looking at abilities, because we're going to need to kind of go back and forth with Warcraft logs, is we're going to go over to warcraftlogs.com, and then this is the homepage that we should be at, and we're going to go ahead and click on raids up at the top. And then we can just find the first boss, Kazzara, and we're just going to hit either all reports or progress, or you're kind of just going for whatever. You're just trying to find a log of it. So I like to go to progress because these are guilds that have actually killed it. And then I just find one that's pretty relevant, maybe one that kills it, in the most average time. So most of these guilds are killing this boss in like 6 minutes. So we wouldn't want to pick the log that, took 9 minutes because as we get to this boss, we can assume that we're probably going to take about the average amount of time. So let's find one that's around 6 minutes. So we'll take Imperative on Illidan. And then we open this up. Oh, they may not have public logs, I believe, is what it looks like. Yeah. So we'll have to find a guild that actually has public logs. So if we want to avoid this problem of finding, this just shows all the guilds that have killed it. And then if you click on them, sometimes you won't get the log because it's private. So instead, we can actually go to all reports. So we go back to raids, all reports for Kazzara, and then we can just filter it by guilds that have killed it. So right here, all kills and wipes, we can just do all kills. And then instead of all difficulties, we can change this to mythic only. So now it's only mythic kills that have been done. And then we kind of just scroll down. The only problem with this is we don't see the fight duration, but that's okay. We'll just go ahead and pick a guild. We'll go ahead and pick Temerity here. And then we can just see it in the summary, how long it took. This is all normal, so we scroll down until we see Mythic. There's Kazzara Mythic, just over 6 minutes. That's perfect. And now we're here. And as it's loading, we'll go ahead and start looking at the fight itself. So we go to Mythic Trap, and we're basically just going to read through this and learn what the fight does. This boss is pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to read through everything. I'm just going to, fast forward basically until we get to the point where we're setting up Bigwigs. So the first thing, Hellsteel Charge at 80%, 60%, and 40% health. Kazzara's armor shatters, dealing a big burst of damage to all players. Right there, that's enough. We've read that this ability is something that we're going to want to be aware of as a healer. It activates based on health, so there's not too much we can do, but if you watch like a kill of this fight, or just anyone, a VOD of this fight, you'll see that it has a cast time. And actually, it says it right here on Mythic Trap. That's really nice. So it says that it's a 3-second cast time. So that means we can set up a warning for it as the cast is going off, just to remind us, maybe press a defensive or something like that. So we go back in game, and we find Hellsteel Carnage, and then we set it up to... we're not going to... And remember, the general rules, if you've watched my previous Bigwig setup guides, the goal is to set up specific sounds that mean the same thing across all the bosses. So if there's, a frontal, we always use the same sound for a frontal. If there's a debuff that goes on us, we always use the same sound for that type of debuff, whether it's something that does a lot of damage to us, or maybe then we change the sound if it's a debuff that we need to move out of the group with or set somewhere in a specific area. And then we try to find one ability for every boss that we enable a countdown for. So for Hellsteel Carnage, we're just going to set some kind of warning sound to remind us to use a defensive. It's not a personal debuff that goes on us, so I'm not going to use that noise that I usually use. Instead, we'll probably just use something like the destruction sound, I think is a good idea. And that'll just remind us, hey, you're about to take a bunch of damage. So there we go. And then that's already set up for that. And then the next thing is Dread Rifts. So this is going to be... marks multiple players with a circle. After 5 seconds, they drop a rift. Don't stand in them. Rifts disappear when a beam touches them. We'll learn about that in a minute. So this is something that we're going to need to get out of the group with, but there's also another ability. So I think with the Dread Rifts, what we're going to do is... I'm tempted to just leave this alone as it is. Because it's going to be very noticeable when we have it. We're going to get a circle around us. We're going to get a countdown over our head with Bigwigs, stuff like that. So I think we're going to leave that alone. And then what we're going to go ahead and do is just move on to the next ability, because I know in this fight there's another ability that targets us with something, which is right here, the Ray of Anguish. Several players are targeted by a beam, which follows them and leaves behind a trail of fire. And you want to kite these beams into the pools that we just dropped on the floor with the previous debuff Dread Rifts. So, with this Rays of Anguish, that's the ability we're going to want to set up to be like, okay, you are targeted by this. So what we're going to do is set it up to only when on me, because we only care about this ability when it's on us. And speaking of, we can actually do that with the previous ability too. And then we go to sounds, and the sound that I like to use for things that we need to move away with or take to a specific location, any kind of movement involved with a debuff, I like to use the flag taken PvP sound. It sounds like this. And that, whenever I hear that sound, I know that I've set it up in a way to where if I hear that sound, I need to start moving. So it helps me react a lot faster to things. So we'll go ahead and set that up. And then we're going to go back to Dread Rifts and just enable that only when on me. That way we don't hear noises when Dread Rifts is going off every time. We only hear the specific noise that it's going to do, which is going to be this alarm sound right here. It goes off. I think it's loading. I think I froze my whole game. There we go. So it'll sound like that. But otherwise it won't make that noise if we aren't targeted. All right. And then what's next? Infernal Fusion. So I think at this point we're at the... Yeah, okay. Now the only other thing is Hellbeam, which Hellbeam is at 100 energy. It's going to do... The boss is going to turn and do a frontal. So we're going to find Hellbeam, and it's just a random frontal, and we are going to probably, I'm trying to think, I think this might be our countdown ability, because it might just be nice to know when that frontal's about to happen, but I do want to make sure, oh, you know what, it's definitely Wings of Extinction that we're going to want a countdown for. So for Hellbeam, we're just going to put a sound, and this is just going to be, since we already used Destruction, we're going to use Beware, and that's just going to let us know. There's a frontal. Beware. So there we go. All right. And then the next thing is learning what, this is mostly for healers, but it's important for everyone, especially if you're like a raid leader or an officer in a guild, that's going to help you a lot, is learning the damage patterns of the boss fight without having much to go off of. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into this log, and now we learned what does a lot of damage. It's going to be the Hellsteel Carnage, people dropping Dread Rifts, and then other than that, the boss just does constant pulsing damage to the entire raid. And then lastly, the Wings of Extinction is going to be like the big, cooldown where we're using like healing cooldowns and stuff like that. So what we do to find this stuff is if you don't find it in Mythic Trap, or you're wondering like, what can we set up cooldowns for? Because I know what abilities do damage now, but which ones can we actually like plan for ahead of time and set up cooldowns for? So now what we do is we're going to go to a log that we had open earlier. We're going to go to damage taken up here at the top. And then once this loads, over here on the top right, we just switch taken by friendly, and we're going to change this to taken from ability. And what this does is it shows the boss's abilities and which ones did the most damage. So first off, we have Infernal Heart. So it's like, okay, this is doing the most damage to the entire raid throughout the fight. So all we do is click this little plus button right here at the end, and it'll add it to the timeline. And then we can go, can we plan healing cooldowns for this? No, not really, because it's just constant pulsing damage throughout the entire fight. So this is just going to happen. We just need to heal through it. There's not much to plan around. So we can exit out of this over the top right, and then we try the next ability. Okay, Wings of Extinction. That we saw in Mythic Trap right here, and it deals a big burst of raid damage, knocks all players back, and applies a 20-second dot. So we're going to want to know when this ability is cast. So we click on the plus button, and again, this one is going to be similar once it shows up. Hopefully it loads. If it doesn't, we can also try selecting it specifically. That might load it. And this ability is going to be very similar to Infernal Heart in that it's going to do damage throughout the entire fight because it also applies a dot to everybody. But what's important is the initial cast of it, because it's going to do an initial big burst of damage, and then it'll just do damage over time for the remainder, which we should be able to see that through the graph. And as you can see, it's right here, Wings of Extinction. So this is the initial cast. This is us getting knocked back, big burst of damage, and then it tops off, and then it starts tapering back down as the damage over time effect becomes less and less deadly. And then it casts again, and this is where we can plan our healing cooldowns. So we can either take note of when this is specifically happening, because it's probably going to be cast around the same time. This is probably a scripted ability, so it's always going to be cast at these times or close to it. But this is where we'll want to plan around. And that also means this could be like the ability that we set up our countdown for instance, if we want to know that it's happening. So we can go in here, Wings of Extinction, and enable a countdown for that. And then we can do this with the other abilities too. So we have Terror Claws. Reading that through Mythic Trap, you'll know that this is the tank ability, so we don't need to worry about that. Infernal Infusion, this is just a mythic mechanic that we can't really do anything about. Hellbeam, Dread Rift. So that's pretty much it, honestly. Oh, we do have the Hellsteel Carnages, which we do want to know when those generally happen. Again, they're health-based, so it's not going to be perfect, but having a general idea of when those overlaps are going to happen, you can plan a little bit more healing cooldowns, since you can assume if you're also killing the boss in about 6 minutes, you're probably going to hit the same, breakpoints. So I believe the first one happens here. I think no, that's okay though. We'll just click on each of them and then just see where they're at, and that's totally fine. So we click on all 3 of them. There's 3 different Hellsteel Carnages because they're different spell IDs. And there we go. So we have the first one that happens here, and it overlaps exactly with a knockback at the same time. So something very, very serious that we're going to need to worry about. So this is where we're going to want to really apply a lot of healing cooldowns. And then we have the second one happen here. Again, they're going to pretty much always overlap with a Wings of Extinction. And there you go. That's how you set up healing cooldowns, just like that. All right, and that pretty much covers everything, so thank you so much for watching. In part 2, we'll be going over the rest of the bosses and talking more just about setting up Bigwigs itself for each of those bosses throughout the raid. So thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.